We are live as they yell at each other. Hello, welcome to 2 on 1, the highest rated Wednesday midday talk show hosted by two disciples clergy talking about pop culture. My name is the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
And I am the Reverend Stephanie Kendall. And 2 on 1 is sponsored by Jeff One-Row Designs, celebrating 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary.
It is such a good motto, but consider this, ordinary time is over in just 3 more Sundays, and you know what comes next.
I do, Advent.
Yeah, Advent. Make your Advent adventurous.
Ooh, take advantage of Advent?
Invest in some Advent vestments for this season of patience, preparation, and anticipation in the life of the church, during this season of patience, anticipation, and preparation in the life of our country.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
For 15 years, the creative team at Jeff One-Row Designs has been handcrafting liturgical textiles. Their processional banners and seasonal banners grace sanctuaries across the country. Their frontals and paraments adorn altars and lecterns in churches of all sizes.
And clergy love their pastor stoles, deacon stoles, chasubles, copes, and other vestments from a variety of traditions: Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Methodist, ELCA Lutheran, United Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, Unitarian, Roman Catholic, not to mention interfaith and non-denominational clergy.
Amazing. So whether you are shopping for the smallest altar accessory or reevaluating your entire collection of vestments and paraments, Jeff One-Row Designs would be honored to work with you to create something perfect just for you.
You can find a catalog of stoles, vestments, paraments, and banners, along with ordering information and customization possibilities at jeffonnrow.com.
Excellent. And if you are watching this and hearing this, and so you, our listener, have a special code to get 15% off your next stole order if you type in 2 on 1, all one word, at checkout.
Wow. We thank Jeff One-Row Designs for being our lead sponsor. These stoles still steal the show. Check them out. Jeff One-Row, WUNROW.com. And with that little touch of love, just a touch of love, it's time to talk Sister Act. I'm going to bring in our guest.
Dun, dun, dun.
There she is. Joining us today is the General Minister and President of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the Reverend Terri Hord Owens. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Well, thank you, Sister Mary Arthur and Sister Mary Stephanie, for inviting me today. It's such a pleasure to be with you both.
We are so grateful. You've been one of the most requested people to come on the show. And so we are just grateful that you have found time, especially on a day that is complicated. So
Yes.
It is a complicated day. And so your presence and your time and your being here with us today is really meaningful. So thank you so much.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
And just excited, as many of you all know, our guests get to pick their topic. So it's something that is, they're familiar with and passionate about. And today's topic is Sister Act, the first movie, not the second one.
Is a 1992 comedy featuring Whoopi Goldberg and Dame Maggie Smith, which I totally forgot about, where Whoopi Goldberg plays Dolores Van Cartier, a Las Vegas nightclub singer who, witnessing a murder, is put in witness protection in a convent in Los Angeles. It's in San Francisco. Thank you very much. And hilarity and hijinks ensue.
They do.
Right.
It happens. Terri, I wonder if you will tell us a little bit about your relationship with this movie. What do you enjoy about it? Why is it still a movie that's meaningful to you?
It's kind of funny. I was talking with the three of you, or the two of you. I'm a little older, so I saw this movie as an adult, who was married with a toddler. So I was in a different stage of life. I think I became a big Whoopi Goldberg fan when from The Color Purple. From that, I think I saw The Color Purple in the theater probably at least 5 or 6 times, and was a big fan of hers then. And because I think it was about church stuff, and I actually hadn't accepted a call to ministry at that point. I'm a second career minister, but I was just a big Whoopi Goldberg fan. I don't think my husband even went with me the first time, but I think I was less interested in all of the gangster stuff and like the chasing and that stuff, and more interested in the transformation that was happening within that community of nuns and with Mother Superior, and in a way that even surprised, Mary Clarence, right? She wasn't prepared for what was happening to her in the midst of that. So I think that's why it stayed with me, and the music, of course, was great. But I initially was drawn to it because I was a Whoopi Goldberg fan, and wanted to see this new thing. And of course, now this movie is just iconic. It's a classic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It is strange with the mobsters, and I have this theory that Eddie the cop is in just the wrong movie. Like he's in a 1980s action movie, and this is a 1980s
Yeah.
comedy. It's really weird.
He is a weird character. Even the cars, I have to say, as I was looking at it, I was like, was that what cars look like in 1992? They look older than that, than the
And they should be
period. I
like
don't know.
jumping hills, like in a 1970. Waka
Yeah,
waka
yeah.
yeah. I really can't wait to see how this gets like transcripted by robots. The waka you know what I'm talking about. They've so Sister Act, and yes, and there's a generational curve in this interview. Spiff and I were talking before we began. We had like 3 videotapes each that we just cycled through as kids, and mine was Sister Act and Wayne's World and The Music Man, which really basically is formational in hindsight. And then Stephanie, I know you had
mine were Sister Act, Wayne's World, and the original Parent Trap with Haley Mills. So
the original.
Yeah.
The original Haley
None
Mills,
of this Lindsay Lohan stuff. It's the Haley Mills version. Was very formational. But Sister Act for me, Arthur tweeted out this week, which I thought was very apt, considering he never engages in our online community. But he said that this movie really informed a lot of his understanding of the missional work of the church, missiology. And until he said that, I hadn't realized the same for me as someone who grew up unchurched. Like my mom was raised Catholic, my dad was raised outside of the church, has some Mormon roots, has some all sorts of, and you were intentionally brought up non-religious, and yet you can't escape an expectation of what the church is supposed to be. And for me, what the church was supposed to be very much resembled a post Sister Mary Clarence church. And I think that's for a lot of reasons of what she brings to that space. But one of the things I think that, I'd like to, I guess, move us into a question about, like, what do we need to do to open our doors to the transformational work of the outsider? We kind of tend to use insider language, create systems that are closed off, even though many of the things we say are, all are welcome. And it's true. I don't believe that that's, not a part of what we're doing, but they become systems, right? And so, like,
all are welcome if they show up at the right time and do what we're doing anyhow, and figure out the language and the process without any coaching.
They're welcome if they can fit into what we're all, what we're already doing. And I think in terms of what we need to do, as I was watching it, and Stephanie, who I have to acknowledge is the first vice moderator of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ right now. So I get to spend a lot of time with Stephanie. And
doesn't it make your life better to spend a lot of time with Stephanie?
It does. It really does.
Well, it's a joy to work with you as well. So
part of my interruption. Excuse me.
No problem. But what was I going to say? The visioning messaging that we've been working on, that we actually started back in. I shared my State of the Church address to the General Board in February about having the courage to imagine and giving ourselves permission to change. And along with that, walking in a freedom from fear of what happens when we do change. And Mother Superior in this movie is sort of, you think about, she doesn't want them out there because she's afraid, not because they're afraid. She's afraid of what will happen to the institution that she leads if they go out there. One of the reasons I like Kathy Jimmy's character, she's Mary Patrick, right?
Yes.
One of the reasons I like her is that she's like, her personality is so outsized. She's willing to try everything. And I think she's where a lot of younger Christians are. It's like, you got a great love for this institution called the church, but you're not of this institution. It didn't necessarily shape you. And she's trying to put herself in this little box in order to be a part of something that she loves. And she, in her natural state, is wonderful and welcoming and unafraid. And is the tipping point in so many places. So I think that's one of the things that we have to do is quit being afraid. We're so afraid of what's out there and what will happen to our buildings and what will happen to, we don't like, the classic generational clash is always over music and worship style, but and now it's like, oh, we don't want to be in this community. We're going to, churches have closed and moved out of communities because they've been afraid of what's going on. So I think that's the number one, maybe the first thing that hit me. It's like, wow, we're so afraid. We're so afraid to be in the world the way Jesus wants us to be in the world. And so if we don't get over that fear that we're going to change, that our institutions are going to change, and that there's a whole, we want the pews filled, but we want them filled with our kind of people. So
I mean, they could have had a tax collector booth right outside of the church, but that would have been a little too obvious. But otherwise,
Yeah.
I mean, here's prostitutes, drunks, and scoundrels.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that. I love that your favorite person is Sister Mary Patrick, because I think she is who the church hopes to be, right? It's who we think we are.
Yeah.
One of my favorite pieces is, within 5 minutes, Sister Mary Clarence is there. They're about to eat dinner, and Sister Mary Patrick is like, "Can you pray for us?" Like, we want to let's learn how she prays rather than let's show her how we pray. And what posture of hospitality that is, that we hope to embody, and yet so often take the Mother Superior role of saying, like, let's show them how it's done rather than learn. And it's I think that her character in this is the hope of the church and the idea of who we hope to be.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And she's and the authenticity with which we ought to be able to live and do that work. I mean, she represents to me, there's so many people who come, who are seeking some kind of spiritual relationship, and they may have particular quirks or idiosyncrasies, or they're, like you say, they're just enjoying themselves and have new ideas, and we want to shut them down and put them into a box. And when she's given the freedom to just be who she is, she makes that whole community better. And we need to, like, I like the way you put it, Stephanie, that she's what we hope the church can be, that presence of both hospitality, but also just innovation, and saying, well, hey, let's go with it. Let's go to the casino. Hey, let's do
she's
that.
A curious one, right? I mean, like, she keeps curiosity alive in the church. And I think some of the fear that you named earlier is actually rooted in a lack of curiosity.
Fear kills curiosity. Yes.
Yeah.
First thing to get jettisoned.
Yeah, we are not curious people in a way that envisions growth. And I think that Sister Mary Robert particularly does that. I think Sister Mary Clarence does that on the back end. There's a level, and I think so does Reverend Mother, or is that Mother Superior? Sorry. And so I guess one of my next kind of question to kind of parlay it, I suppose, is what happens when leadership tries to hold us back? One of my favorite moments is when Mother Superior is like, they hear the Pope's coming, right? And oh my goodness, the Pope is coming. And she goes, I think a more traditional service
affair would be appropriate.
Is it? Yeah. Is it? And it negates all the work that these women have done to get to where they are, the nuance and the expansiveness that the Spirit has worked in this community, kind of squelched by the expectation of who we serve. And so I wonder how you see that playing at work today in the church.
I think we still have, and we can feel that. And again, it's another form of fear. We feel that. You can tell those people that just want to keep things the way they are. And a lot of times they're either concerned about how it will play If you're a clergy person, how that plays in the church that you serve, and will you still have your job? And it also plays, I think, in a lot of lay folks. And one of the difficult notions of a more congregational polity, such as our own, is that we often have people who their own institutional power is entrenched with who they are as a lay person in a particular congregation over generations. And my father, my mother, my grandfather was this, that, and the other. And they just want things to be comfortable the way they've always been. And that, again, just squashes creativity, but it closes up the openness that we have to really be witnesses to the love of Jesus Christ. Because we're not the Lions Club, we're not a fraternity or sorority. So it's like, we're not pledging people here. That's not what we're doing. And it's like, you don't, if you're just wanting people to we want people to know Jesus, not you. You're not coming to the church so you can be like Stephanie and Arthur, right?
I mean, the world would be better. No.
Yeah. But it's like, my husband says to me all the time, when I, as much competitive speaking as I did in high school, the first time I preached, I was just absolutely paralyzed with this notion of, and I was, in my late 30s when I started seminary, just absolutely paralyzed with this idea that I would be preaching the word of God, I'd be in a pulpit, people would be listening to me. It was just paralyzing. And Walter, he will say that to me all the time. He says, Terri, they don't want to see you. They want to see Jesus. And what we've done is created a club sort of atmosphere. And all these little clubs are very different across the country, based and even in Canada, based on what the local culture is. And we're more focused on who we are than on who Jesus is calling us to be for other people. And so when we clamp down, it's always a humanly derived thing. It's even, I was in a church one time and I was visiting, and a young woman came in and she had a very short skirt on. And immediately, this is a Black church, immediately someone appears with a handkerchief to lay across her lap. Well, really, are these some kind of, you have some sort of modesty, whatever's, but those are secondary, superficial things that go after the heart and soul work that you really care about people drawing to. We're so caught up in our human constructions that we fail to see the big soul picture and the soul work that has to go on. So when leaders get like that, then that to me is a big signal. This is really more about you and your stuff and your leadership than it is about what the church is intended to be, and how we help people get beyond ourselves and really focus on being some tiny reflection of God's glory, right? Some we're not perfect, but hopefully people will look at us and say, hey, those people, I like those people. I want to do and be what they're doing, and not like, oh God, I'm sure that young woman left the church going, she was humiliated.
Sure.
That's not how we bring people in. And we think we're being holy when we do that. We think by insisting on this kind of, I don't know what the word is for it, but on this kind of compliance, right? Or declaring certain things sinful. I always say, so if God's the creator, how does the creature get to tell the creator who the creator will love? If God has no limits, then who are you in your frail human state able to draw lines and put boxes around what God will love? And God, you can't do that, because then you've limited God, and that's not possible. At least in my theology, it's not possible. Yeah. So when people do those sorts of things, it says to me, you're limiting God. There may be a certain way to go about doing things because of process and that kind of stuff. And, denominations fight with that kind of stuff all the time. But when those processes and those rules and all that stuff gets in the way of us really being who Jesus has called us to be, it's problematic. It's just, and it will kill us. It will kill us.
It would.
I went to go visit a church years ago as like a secret shopper. And just said, show up and see what happens. And I did. And as worship started, they're all really excited. And it's, a sanctuary and there's a baptistry. And then you hear this me as the screen comes down and the projector turns on and they half-heartedly sing some praise and worship songs. And then the screen goes back up and like worship's alive again. And they're singing hymns and they're praying for one another. And then me and the like half-hearted praise and worship. It was amazing. And afterwards I said, so why do you do the praise and worship songs? They're like, well, we hope our kids will come back. And it kind of broke my heart a little because they want their kids to come to bring their grandkids, but also like it just wasn't good. And it wasn't good because it was bad, which it was. It wasn't good because it wasn't authentic.
Yes.
So with that, and watch this pivot. So we get, and thank you, by the way, that was a brilliant answer. I just, this kind of popped into my head on it so we get the music using Motown songs and Jesus Is My Boyfriend to the nth degree, but it starts to bring people back in. And Sister Mary Clarence never says it's not a performance. She in fact calls it a performance. It's getting butts in the seats.
Yeah.
Like, so can worship be performative?
My husband is a minister of music at a really large church in Chicago, Baptist church, about 10,000 members. And he's got degrees in music and conducting and all that kind of stuff. But he grew up in a Pentecostal church. So as he says, he has his learning and his burning. But there, and creatives, I mean, I think that the art is the vehicle. And anyone who's creative, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to hone the craft as you do that work. So to say that you want to have a choir and insist on other certain kind of performance values, I don't think there's anything wrong or inconsistent in that, because you offer, the way I think about it, you offer to God the best of whatever that craft is. So if Stephanie's going to do a trailer or a little video, Stephanie's own performance and production values are going to be high because that's just who she is and her gifts. And so if we have these particular gifts in music, I don't think there's anything sacrilegious about saying, let's do it well. And let's try to reach, because you do that with a sermon, you will craft and hone the illustrations, the closings, because you want to elicit a particular response. You're intentional about gestures and maybe lead-in songs or quotes and things that you use. You're intentional. And I think what she was saying, and this is part of, I think, her own transformation. It was like, well, first, if I'm going to do this, we're going to do it good, right? We're going to do it well. And then that first rehearsal, when she was like, you got to have, she said expression, but she's like, you got to think about what you're singing about, right? What are the words and what do the words mean? So I think we sell ourselves short as the church when we don't allow ourselves to have these high artistic values for God. Come on. Yeah. I don't think that there's anything wrong or sacrilegious or vain even in wanting things to be done well, because there is a performance aspect to those things because it's the delivery of this message that we're carrying on the wings of some art form. Right. And so in order for people to receive it, the message doesn't get through with a dry choir. The message, if you're going to have a video or a praise and worship song, if that stuff isn't done well, it doesn't even reach your spirit. So the art, if it's good, right? And then you can get a whole thing as to my aesthetic versus your aesthetic and what's good or bad and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, let's do this well, and let's make people want to come. Willow Creek Community Church, a good friend of mine was one of the sort of on the founding staff of that with Bill Hybels back in the day, and was sort of the heart and soul of their whole drama ministry. They were intentional. There's a moment they're going to bring you to an emotional peak with a question and a conflict that the sermon was going to resolve. But they were really intentional about lighting and sound, saying that if this isn't done well, nobody's going to pay attention. Mm-hmm. We don't have the opportunity again. So that's the vehicle that we're using. It's like having a good sound system. You can't hear unless you've got a good sound system. So, I mean, all of those things to me are vehicles for delivering the message. And if they're done well, the message has a much better chance of being heard. So I'm all with the performative aspects of it, because performance can be authentic. Really good artists
Absolutely.
are authentic, and they also have pretty high values for their own production.
Mhm.
So that to me is not.
And I mean, those that first shared the gospel, as orators, are anything if not, a roaming theater troupe, right?
Yeah,
You're gonna listen to the gospel if you're just sitting in a corner talking like this, like saying the good news of Jesus. There's a performative aspect that is inherently a part of how we understand and how historically we have received the good news.
Mars
So I
Hill.
to say no,
Mars Hill, yeah. Or even Jesus. You think, if you've ever been to Israel, to the location where the Sermon on the Mount was delivered, the acoustics in that spot are amazing. So you think about, like, there were, all these thousands and thousands of people. Jesus, if he had projected, would have easily been heard well in this space. It's almost a natural amphitheater. But that's, I can't imagine that Jesus was dry and dull and ho-hum.
I don't either.
Because he told stories, right? Jesus told stories.
The theologian Douglas Adams, may he rest in God's peace, wrote the book The Prostitute and the Family Tree, which is about discovering humor and irony in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what saved my call to ministry, because I was working professionally as a comedian, and I thought, I don't want to go to be in dry, boring church. And exactly that kind of thing. If Jesus was boring, I would rather go to a different church or a different religion.
Let me just say real quickly too, the thing that those Motown songs are sort of what at the heart of parables are common aspects of culture. Jesus takes things that they know about and uses that to tell a story and to teach. Those people knew that Motown music. And so I can think of lots of other gospel songs, like the Gladys Knight and the Pips took, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." That was one of their songs. There's a gospel group that made that. "Jesus is the best thing that ever happened to me." There's a Luther Vandross song about, I forget the name of it, but there's a gospel artist called Darwin Hobbs who sounds like Luther, and he took this love song and turned it into this really slow kind of praise song for Jesus. And he's a hit because people already know that music, and shifting that still is happening in gospel music today. Taking some familiar secular music, shifting the words around a little bit and reorienting them with a Christian message, and people are like, "Oh yeah, that's my jam." So I get it. So that to me is like brilliant, because that's what Jesus did. He took stuff that people were already familiar with and he used it to teach them.
I will be perfectly honest, coming into this, I was like, the Motown, like, I think I derisively called it "Jesus is my boyfriend" music. I've never thought in terms of parable. And I'm happy to admit that I learned something today. So thank you.
So we're getting questions. I'm checking our feed online. So we have questions from the audience.
Sure. Excellent.
Which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, keep it up, guys.
Yeah, I will say it's from Travis Smith McKee, who should be writing.
Speaking of music as parables, Travis owes us a final question song, which he has not gotten to us in like 30 weeks. Could you please, as general minister and president, take away his standing as a minister?
Actually, I can't, but I can encourage him. Hi, Travis. Let's try to make this happen.
Amazing. Well, so there's a question from Travis that says that's talking about how large churches and downtown locations are a presence, a visible importance to everyone. But when the people affiliated with the church prove they are fearful or closed off, they are even more visible as irrelevant. Can we be a presence even without a large building? Can we dance with the community and love without demanding perfection? I think that's a really important question, because at the heart, I think, of what this show, why this movie was so important to my missiology, is that I saw the church in the streets. I was really moved by the music, obviously.
Just touch of love,
as we've been singing Just a Touch of Love all morning. But what really moved me, and what I think is the real work of this show, is that it gets the nuns back out into the community, and it shows the importance of faith communities in their local community. And so I don't know, do we want to speak to that? Can we dance with the community in love without demanding perfection? And can we be a presence without a building?
And we're going to have to be, first of all, because we can't invite people to those edifices right now. We can't do that. And a lot of the work that our general ministries are doing, I'm thinking of particularly like the NBA COVID-19 grants, the National Benevolent Association, giving churches grants so that they could continue their mission and service to the community. So they could figure out ways to do that work without doing it. If they couldn't do it from a building, at least giving them some money to think through innovation like that. I have one really good, several stories that I could tell about congregations who were that big steeple church on the big downtown corner back in the day, where if you were anybody in the community and you had a certain kind of job, you had a country club membership and you had a church membership, not at any church, but at that church with the big steeple downtown. They used to be called High Street Christian Church in Akron, Ohio. Huge building. They sold that building. They're now called Harmony Springs, and I think they've been worshiping as Harmony Springs maybe 7 or 8 years. I was with them maybe a year and a half ago. They're meeting in the fitness center that's owned by Cleveland Clinic Health System. And they have their own like roll in, roll out audio system. They have tables set up in the back of just this big room. That's serious talking, I'm sorry. They're worshiping it in what's what they would think of as a shell of their former selves, because no one knows they're in there. No one knows they're in that building. So if you're inviting people to worship, you got to tell them what they're now known for is what they're doing outside the building. The pastor is the father of a couple of toddlers, and he works in the local Starbucks that's down the street. So when they go by the Starbucks, the little boy goes, "There's Daddy's office." The child has never known his dad to have an office in a building. They go to this space to worship, but all the other work they're doing is not necessarily in that space. And they're reimagining the courage to imagine who they are and what they need to do. The church that my husband serves has a really big building, but before they had this really nice space, they would go out on Saturday mornings and do this thing called it was something about the block, on the block, and they would assign people to different blocks in this particular zip code. Very depressed community, and they just go door to door on Saturdays and say, "Hey, you need your grass cut, you need me to go to the store to get milk," or didn't say anything about church for many, many weeks until they built a relationship. They were just out there to serve, and then they started like sending buses to these areas and inviting people. You don't have to worry about parking, just hop on the bus and we'll bring you to church. By which point relationship is built. Those people had never seen the outside of the building, weren't invited to come to the building in order to be served. But I think we're going to have to figure that out in this new world, because we're definitely not going to get back to the way we've been, but we got to figure out how to be church and do something other than just inviting people to our buildings at this point. So.
Well, and I serve Riverside Christian Church in Wichita, Kansas. It's in the heart of the Riverside neighborhood, which is just full of weirdos. And I mean that in a loving way. Like I tell people it's Austin, Texas in Wichita, easiest way to put it. And our building is huge because we have an education building that's never met its potential. And the question is, how do we open it up? Because the conversation of I'm like, chuck the building. Nope, that's heresy. But like, how do we open it up? How do we be good stewards, which includes not having control and not having all rights over what happens to and with people. And the folks in that community that couldn't go out and get milk or couldn't cut their own grass, they're not the winners that you want in your big steeple church. What does it mean that the prostitutes are coming in off the street in San Francisco into the church? And I don't know why I'm focusing on that, except the Kathleen and Jimmy dancing has just been in my head.
Well, in the I was going to say, in the Black church, in the Black community, I think in other communities of color, their church has been this grounding institution for so much other work in the community, because for Black folks, definitely it was like the only place they could control, right? We got our building, and so we have a school, and so we do community development stuff, and we use the building to gather because it's a safe place and we can control that. So that's one aspect of it. And I think buildings can still be leveraged, but if you're what the trend has been for decades now is that you don't just build a worship for Sunday's worship space, right? You build Salem Baptist Church in Chicago built a huge 10,000 seat facility, but it has movable seats on the floor, and the floor is literally big enough to have 3 regulation basketball courts on the floor. And so they move it. The Chicago Bulls have used their space for summer youth camps. Other high schools in the area have used that space for like graduation ceremonies, et cetera. Other groups have used it for conferences. They wanted it to be a community space. So you walk in, you're like, are those like lines on the floor? Is this a multi-purpose floor? It's not carpeted. It's just a multi-purpose floor that could do, that can do anything and serve for anything. And so they've been a good steward to their community and been willing to allow people to come in and use that building for a lot of different things. It's not just Sunday worship space.
Well, so within that, in Sister Act, part of it was they wanted to raise money to fix the roof, which had been
Yeah.
in this beautiful cathedral. I will admit that's the one part that just like, how do we bring people in so they can give us money when we pass the basket so we can fix our roof is not an ecclesiological question that deserves.
Exactly.
But I guess they needed to show success in some way. And I always question with church stuff, how churched someone is or isn't when a church is presented. Because like, where were the old people saying, we want our hymns exactly as Jesus wrote them? Because you know that they are in the congregation.
Yeah.
Is that syncopation? That's the devil's music. That never gets.
Are we clapping and moving here? Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. No downbeat.
Yeah. There's a lot. I wonder, and I've been wondering as I will admit, I watched this last night during the returns. It's a heavy day for a lot of us, or a challenging one for lots of different ways. And watching the returns and watching the demographics of them and watching how yet again Black women and Black men have turned out for the vote and really carried and done their part. And it made me question, and I'm wondering how y'all felt about this, but is this another way in which the white church has used Black talent, Black gifts to kind of perpetuate their own mission? Because Sister Mary Clarence comes into an all-white order and singing in I would call what they were doing singing, and then uses her gifts, and then still for what it's brings her into a loving environment, but there's still a part of me that sees this as just using her in a certain way. I don't know, how does that sit with you all? Does that ring true for this story? And y'all, so you don't have to answer that. That was just on my mind of like wanting to make sure we give credit where credit is due. That it's, that not only did she, I think Sister Mary Clarence gets a lot of, yay, she turned around the music, but what she really did was allow the Holy Spirit to move in this congregation once again.
Right.
With her, the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the living God in real time to a community that probably should have died.
Yeah. I mean, she transforms that community, definitely. From the leadership, from, Mother Superior, and just that one artful, when Mother Superior is very angry at her initially, and the pastor is outside the door and hearing what's going on, and how she immediately connects to what's happening and sort of uses that as a way to say, oh, isn't this lovely? In fact, Mother Superior, what she wants us to do is you haven't even heard it all. She wants us to go out, and be part of the community. So I think that's, I mean, you see churches using sort of contemporary music like that all the time, right? Well, if we have contemporary music, or if we have livelier stuff, then, people will come, but it can't be just that.
Right.
It can't be just that. So if you're just using, I think if it had only been used to, um, bump up the worship, and we didn't see this other stuff happening, I think I would feel a little more strongly about it. And I think she even makes the point. She's like, how am I as a Black person going to hide in this all white community, this convent? So I think there's lots of concerns to be careful about there. And I think, well, even one of the challenges that we have as a community that tries to be multiracial and encourage, and we will get our General Assembly worship time, Stephanie. At some point we'll get to plan and do that. We will do it. But everybody, because we're an 80% white church, the tendency is for that a good piece of those people to be concerned about music it's too loud, it's too this, it's too that, and we want, and so even in those kind of contexts, part of our love for one another has to be that worship has to reflect a lot of us. It can't always reflect just me. And so styles that you have to recognize that God created all people, and that not everybody knows the just the tunes that line the hymns in the chalice hymnal. That's not the only music that is there. Not that that's not good music. It's just not all there is. And when we insist that everything is like me, that to me is my friend Julia Middleton, who's a consultant in the UK and writes on cultural intelligence, which is similar to what we do with cultural humility. But for her, it came out of a business context to say, wherever you land in the world, you ought to be able to have the capacity to look around the room and recognize that every person with whom I engage is different from me. And so we all have things that are like core to our identities and core to how we operate. But I got to learn how to flex in order to get along with other human beings. There's certain things that ground me, but it never has to be all like me or all what I like. And if I want relationships with people, I've really got to, whether we're Black, white, male, female, that's not it. I have, black glasses, Stephanie has on tortoise shell. You may like a certain kind of food. I may not like a certain kind of food, certain kind of movies. There are differences in us as human beings. And the moment we get locked into what is good or better, when we make differences deficiencies, then we get caught up, and that plays itself out in church all the time.
All the time.
And the people who are in power want the stuff to stay the way they want it. And as a denomination that's 80% white, we have to be really, really careful, because we're working in a world where white privilege has said certain kinds of cultural expressions are better just because they're affiliated with white people. And that just can't be. That's not of God. It simply cannot be. So whether it's young, old, whatever, and those kinds of transformations, we have to be open to things, because everything's of God, right? Yes, everything is of God. So
my kiddo is 10, and when she'll say, I'm hungry, I say, okay, we'll go get something to eat. Like, I mean, with meals, we make meals together and this and that, but it's the whole idea of like, if you're hungry, feed yourself.
Yeah.
And someone at not this church, at a previous setting once said to me, well, I'm going somewhere else because I'm just not getting fed. And I always think, well, spiritually, how? Like, babies are inherently selfish, and I get that. Toddlers are remarkably selfish, but as you grow, you develop this whole like self-reliance, but also community. And I really like what you had to say. I would like to talk about Eddie for a moment, if we could, if that's okay. So for those of you who haven't seen Sister Act, there's this 1980s action star, he's not really a star, but there's like an action cop movie subplot where like Eddie is like rough And at one point he catches a leak, and I don't know if y'all noticed this, but he literally just walks in on the guy on the phone, doesn't listen to him, doesn't ask any questions. He just punches him in the face and yells, "We found our leak," and has him arrested. They don't even read him his rights.
Yeah.
Like the movie ends with him shooting a gun through the window in slow mo. It's weird. It's like kindergarten cop weird.
Yeah.
So how do we incorporate, you know what I'm talking about?
I do. That's
Yeah, I
the
do.
fun
I
part.
do.
It's the but how do we, so like we have action movie heroes in our religious comedy. We have people who think this is a period drama in our religious comedy. What do we do with the action movie stars who don't, what do we do with the people who can't figure out our genre? I think you kind of answered that. Like,
yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about that. What do we do with the people who can't figure out our genre?
Well,
I think that goes back to what Terri was saying earlier, right? Is that like when we pin ourselves into a genre is where we start to lose the ability to bring in more characters.
Right.
If we've pinned the church to a certain drama and pinned ourselves to a certain genre and pinned ourselves to a certain genre, you know, ideally, I think that's what, you know, we hope for in calls, right? Is that those genres kind of align. And yet we're also hoping that the genre of your pastor is expansive enough to get other genre stars to pay attention, to come in, to give attention and energy and all of the things. And so I think it's when we start to generalize when we start to singularize ourselves that we lose our ability to be expansive for the general.
That's good.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because the church has to keep evolving and changing, right? There are several people who say one of our former GMPs, Dick Ham, says, you know, that the design was created and agreed to at the end of the 60s, and it was really based on a 1950s model of church. So by the time we caught up with the other denominations, you know, people were thinking differently about institutional structures and processes for denominational life, and even congregational life. Everybody's like, well, how do we reimagine and reshape our congregations? And we talk about new church and what's that going to look like. And you know, if you spend any time with at the Leadership Academy that New Church has, where you've got people from all over the US and Canada who've got different ideas about what their congregational life needs to be. And so what grounds that all for me is, and that's why people need to be so, you know, when I talk about prayer and Bible study, I'm not talking about it in a dogmatic kind of way. I'm talking about, it's like diet and exercise, right? It's like, you need spiritual practices. And the one thing that we have that we agree, I think, that is authoritative for us, not literal, but has authority on which we can sort of wrestle with and hang our hats, is scripture. So if we're not building capable spiritual beings who can wrestle with the truth using these frameworks of how we understand God and how we understand Jesus, the worship can look a lot of different ways. The building can look a lot of different ways. We don't have to have the 1960s choir robes, or even pastors don't really, you know, there's still traditions where people wear robes and collars a lot. I'm not one who ever did. I wear them for big things, but there's a whole shift. And we always get, you know, the genre shifting. We always have to be open to new ways of doing it. The fundamental truths stay the same, but how they're interpreted in our society, we got to be open and paying attention to how we shift in order to be relevant.
Well, if you do need a stole, I know a guy.
I love stoles, actually. When I do stuff in DC, I will wear a stole as opposed to a clergy collar. I hate those things. I hate the collars.
Oh, they're the worst.
I would just rather have a stole. And so I'm up for stoles. Yes.
Well, jeffmonroe.com, if you use the code 2on1, 15% off a stole. So.
I'll have to check into that.
Oh, so they, yeah, clergy collars. I only used to wear them when I flew because I reject the body scan, because I don't like the body scan at airports. So when you're standing like this, wearing a clergy collar, getting patted down by the TSA, you might start a riot in Newark, which I almost did once, where just a bunch of New Jersey guys were like, "What do you even do to you, huh?" It was great.
Well, I think that we have this time has flown by.
It really has.
I feel like I could talk Sister Act with you forever.
We could
well,
add Sister Act 2 to the mix, maybe.
I was gonna say, would you be willing to come back for
I-
Sister Act 2?
I would love that. Yeah.
I would love to have that. Well, and so, all right, you're locked in. You're our Sister Act 2 guest. I'll work with your assistant and find a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that being said, as we are wont to do, thank you so much for joining us. And
This is great.
this has been just a really
It's been fun.
wonderful way to spend today.
Yeah. It's I've forgotten all about all the other stuff that's happening.
Me too, except for I apologize that my computer clearly has not, and I don't know how to turn off that stupid sound that keeps popping up of people texting. Anyway, the final question for you to answer first, and then we will also answer, is what biblical theme, story, character, narration, anything are you most reminded of in Sister Act?
Gosh, I've been trying to think about this, and one of them is, and you might think this is, I don't know what you'll think about this, but when I think about Mary Clarence, it's like people who are just themselves and went about the task in their own way. Mm-hmm. It maybe not even realizing what the task was, or that it was even of God. And I think Esther gets short shrift in terms of the work that Esther actually does, because her uncle is trying to tell her, you got to go in and do this, and so that our people are be saved. And she's like, are you nuts? If I go in, without any without permission, I'll be killed, etc. But the way she crafts her whole strategy, and understands exactly what needs to happen in the moment. I think Mary Clarence understands, gets to see what's going on, and figures out what, at every turn, she's always figuring out what needs to happen in the moment. And Esther, even after she has the dinner for Haman, it takes her a year to prepare for that. We skip over the long time of preparation that it took. So her, in terms of responding to the situation in her own way and being a lot smarter and not really caring about it. And the other person is Nehemiah. Okay. Nehemiah, he sets out to do something, and everybody's trying to get him off the wall by pointing to some false crisis that's happening, and he needs to go back. And it's like, no, going to stay here and kind of do this. And so that, I don't know if those are direct corollaries, but when I think of Mary Clarence, I think of people who did things not quite the way you'd think they would do them, and were called upon in times when, as the prophet Nehemiah, people I'm sure thought, well, dude, you better go back and see what's going on. And he's like, no, they're trying to distract me from getting this particular work done. And I'm not safe, and he understood that he wouldn't be safe if he left that. And then, Esther, in terms of not just, for such a time as this, I'm going to see the king, but I always think about Esther as like, kind of laying low for a bit and figuring things out. So those are my two.
Great answers.
Yeah. Wow. I'm going to go next because I think I know Spiffs, and I just want to be the cream filling in this.
Okay.
I'm going to go for James, because of, if you say I'm praying for you and you don't actually feed the person who does it, what's the point? And James was probably not a Christian document. It was probably just like vaguely theist or Jewish. And I love that it's in our Bible, because of course it is. Like, we just have this weird collection of stuff towards the end, but the simple fact of, you don't see someone in need and then not address that if you can.
Right. Yeah.
What does it mean that the church uses a broken down car to become something children play. And I mean, there's airs of Micah of beating their swords into plowshares as well.
Yeah.
Here's a burnt out bug, and now it's a playground. I don't know, but
it's the gifts of the people, those women. That's another thing. It's like, who knew that older nun could fix I mean, there are all sorts of things that come up because they're given the freedom to do what they can do. So
freedom, imagination, and courage. Yes.
I'm going to go a different way, but as we're just talking, and I use her a lot, and so this is not my final answer, but there's a Miriam aspect to like Miriam and her women going out singing and dancing, and I didn't choose that because I have done it before, and I felt it was too easy, and so, but there's a real spirit of Miriam, I think, in what is happening here. But I went with Joshua 6 in the Fall of Jericho, and how he tells, there is a moment to be silent, and then there's a moment to shout. And I really feel like the church is before the moment to shout is that Sister Mary Clarence moment. And when she does, the walls come tumbling down. And we have this new understanding of how we are to be in and with community and church. And so for me, that's Sister Act writ large.
That's good.
Then I also had and Sister Mary Clarence is John the Baptist in a way who comes in with, a different background, a different understanding, a different way of dressing, a different way of, understanding the world, and yet has the most profound change on all the disciples and the way in which we experience that narrative. And so those were my two answers to that.
Oh, those are really good. Oh, I like that. That's good.
Terri Hord Owens is the General Minister and President of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. Shout out to our Canadian brothers and sisters who are just eating popcorn watching our country right now.
Shaking their heads.
We cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your busy and fruitful schedule to talk to us about Sister Act. Thank you. Spiff, who's coming up in the next couple weeks, by the way?
We have Monica Banks coming up next week, and we are talking Cardi B. After that, we are
take us a playlist. I'm so lost.
We will have a playlist out there ready for people to talk. But here's, I guess, probably a content warning. WAP will come up next week, so just it's art, but just know. Lucifer with Kelsey Creech, who is the president of Disciples at Yale. She's coming on in the week after that, and then hold on, I have a calendar. And then I believe we're doing Weird Al. So we have and we've got people on the books for The Good Place. We have there's a lot coming up, and so stay tuned.
Weird Al has the best Hamilton medley. Have you heard the Hamilton medley? It's phenomenal.
It's short shrift on the end, Peggy, which is my favorite line in all.
Yeah.
I'm going to share this for 1 second. A reminder that our sponsor today is Jeff One Row Designs, jeffonerow.com. 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. We want to make sure you see it, Terri, because you may be shopping for a new stall.
I see it. I'm writing this down.
The code 2-on-1, all one word, at checkout for 15% off all stores.
Thank you again and again and again, Terri. It's an honor and a privilege and a pleasure, most certainly.
Thank you so much, Arthur and Stephanie. My joy.
It has been 2-on-1. We will see you next week for Cardi B with Monica Banks, and I'm Arthur Stewart, joined with Stephanie Kendall forever and Terri Hord Owens. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Sure.